I live in Kansas City, right? And so I grew up a fucking dyed-in-the-wool Chiefs fan. You know, my dad is probably the single biggest Chiefs fan that I'll ever meet in my life. Never missed a fucking game, like hell or high water, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, but also as a leftist and as somebody who, you know, feels a strong compulsion to stand in solidarity with, you know, oppressed communities wherever they are. And, you know, whenever, you know, and, you know, honestly just takes kind of the cue from them. Well, you know, the ball's in their court, you know, to use a sports analogy, right? And, you know, there has been a lot of, you know, movement from Native American communities kind of talking about and criticizing, you know, not specifically the Chiefs necessarily. There was a lot of effort to get the Redskins to change their name. But, you know, the Chiefs is not necessarily a popular name amongst Native communities. A lot of people have expressed, anger. And I think a lot of that's justified, right? Like in a way, after we've, you know, the way that Native Americans have been treated in this country, which is the fact of the matter is that there was an attempted genocide. I don't want to say that there was a genocide, right? Because there are people here who are still, you know, doing everything that they can to maintain that culture that's been beaten and repressed and, you know, pushed into these, you know, just devastated communities nowadays. And they're holding on to their traditions. And yet here we are as spectators, you know, filling Arrowhead Stadium with 70,000 people, you know, on a non-COVID season, making a shit ton of money off of the name, the heritage, you know, not paying any kind of recognition, not paying any kind of compensation to the people who, you know, had been completely pillaged, destroyed, their culture, you know, devastated, completely eradicated, exterminated, you know, whatever adjective you want to use. And, you know, it kind of reminds me, and I've heard people use a lot of like really extreme analogies, right? People have said it would be like if, you know, the Nazis won the war and it was like, you know, they're going to have the rabbis perform as a football team. You know, I'm wondering where is your head at on that? And what do you think about that? And would you support a name change for the Chiefs? We floated, you know, things like the Free Staters, the abolitionists, you know, things that could still maintain the kind of Midwest tradition and character of the Chiefs. I don't know. Where's your head at on that?
Listen, I support anything that is about equity and equality and repairing the wrongs that this country, this society has done. People that have been less fortunate or people that have been oppressed. You know, this idea, you know, I will call it a genocide. Like they murdered these people. Like we came here.
Well, yeah, I just mean a lot of people who are Native and in the Native community, they don't like to call it a genocide because it kind of implies that it's gone. Yeah.
Right. No, I get it. I get it. And it wasn't a response to you specifically. It was just to anybody that is like, oh, is it really? No, it's like we came here, we stole their land, we killed off the majority of their population and their culture. Not only killed them, then took their land, named the land that we took and stole after them, right? Like as some homage, or some sick homage.
Yeah,
like,
every elementary school in my childhood school district is named after a different from age. It was like before all of them are named. It's like Pawnee, the Creek, like Shawnee. You know what I mean?
Right. Like, you know, how many counties are named? You know, Osceola and Seminole. Like we stole their land, we murdered them, named things after them, and then we didn't even have the decency to like actually sit down with these tribes and like get their point of view on like, hey, how would you feel if I named my franchise the Redskins? And like that, it took 100 years. Like it literally took 100 years for us to actually sit down. I know that people have been protesting it since the 90s or whatever, but like that it actually took 100 or so years for actually people to sit down and say, you know, that logo, that name, it's kind of offensive and it hurts people. And I know what people will say, well, it doesn't affect me. I watched the Redskins and I'm not offended, because it's not about you. It's not about John Doe in Kansas somewhere, white guy, black guy, whatever, that it's not offended. If it offends one Native American family or one Native American person, then the name is fucked up. And I think you should change it. And the same thing goes for the Chiefs or the Braves or whatever. Like, obviously.
The Cleveland Indians. Did they ever change their name?
They're actually keeping the name for 1 year, but then changing it officially next year. So they announced.
They also have a really fucked up logo.
I think they changed that a while back, right?
Well, yeah,
it used to be like a dead-ass Redskin Native.
Yeah, they changed that.
But you can still get stuff with Chief Wahoo stuff on it, right? Like
that's
and stuff like that. Like, look, when I was a kid, I had a Chief Wahoo
Is that the guy's name? Is there like an actual? Is that the mascot too?
Yeah, that's a mascot's name, Chief Wahoo, right? So like,
okay, gotcha.
I as a kid, right, when I was young Manny, wasn't my political leanings weren't there yet, obviously, right? I had a Chief Wahoo hat. I thought it was the coolest logo ever. And then of course I matured, I grew up, and like I started looking at things for what they were, and I was like, yeah, this is messed up. I probably should never like actually wear that logo, never wear anything with that logo on it again.
God, I mean, even if you just go back like 5 or 10 years, the kind of like, Halloween costumes you see with ridiculous like Native American headdresses and
Go
stuff.
to a rave 5 years ago, you know what I mean?
People don't get how this is offensive.
I know.
Right? Like it's like they don't get that, like, yeah, it's cultural appropriation. And it's not even like you're paying respect to it. It's almost like you're it's like a fetishizing it in a way, like, oh yeah, we don't pay any respect to these people, but we want to be called warriors because they signify fight and strength and whatever, right? But it's typical of what we do as a country, right? Like we say we're paying respect and homage to these people, but we don't care about what's going on in these Indian reservations, the drug use, the suicide rate.
Well, not only that, I don't know if you've heard Oak Flat in Arizona, there's a current treaty right now that's existed since the 1800s, right? Giving these Native Americans, it's called Oak Flat. It's like a holy ground, right? Spiritual land that Native Americans have been visiting indigenous people have been visiting for generations. I mean, long time, right? Before fucking white people got here, and then. While John McCain was still alive, he signed a deal with an international mining company that's going to come in and mine Oak Flat, just exchanging that land, which belongs to the Native Americans, according to our own fucking treaty that's still active, still law. And then they're going to swap it out for different land in Arizona and not give it back to the Native Americans. And that's happening right now. There's not even protests. There's not even anything in the news about that.
Right. Yeah. It's like, hey, back to 1764 America. Like, I mean, it's just like,
it's domestic imperialism, right? I mean, it's modern day imperialism.
Absolutely. It's imperialism. It's totalitarianism. I mean, it's just every kind of ism you want to think about, right? It's all the bad isms anyway. Like it's sickening, right? That the harm that we've caused these people, our natives, the original folks of this country, of this land. And we continue to do, and we do it in these ways that it's just so cruel and so, just mean-spirited, right? Like the fact that like we literally have to have a debate whether the name Indians is offensive or not. Like it doesn't matter if I'm personally offended or Gavin's personally offended or anybody listening to the show is personally offended. It's like if one guy in a reservation in North Dakota is offended, then yes, it's a problem.
And more than one guy, and more than one people, exactly, 100%.
Like, oh, I'm just offended to be offended. Like, no, I have like cultural reasons why it's offensive. Then it's a problem, and it should be. So I support any name change. Sure, is it going to be weird not knowing the Chiefs someday as the Chiefs? And they'll be called the Free Staters, obviously. And somehow, in some way in my mind, they'll still always be the Chiefs, just like the Redskins will always be the Redskins. But I absolutely support the Redskins changing the name. It should have happened decades ago.
Yeah. I think it's ridiculous too that it's so indicative of corporate culture, where especially with the Washington football team, basically refusing to change it up until the absolute boiling point of racial awareness.
Owner too, so it shouldn't surprise anybody. For those that don't know, Dan Snyder is the owner of the Washington Redskins, and he's just a moron on so many levels. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that it took that long. And honestly, it took FedEx and a bunch of companies and investors.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, they said they were
pressure him into actually change it because he was not going to change the name.